Hey guys, this is Chris Willman with Willman Guitars here. This morning I just wanted to do a little bit of acoustic guitar history and how we came into the modern guitar and the cat's here to join us, because I think guitars have become such a common instrument that everyone's playing, steel string, electric, and acoustic guitars, but as far as from a luthier perspective and building them, it's important to know why they're made the way they're made and where they came from. And I'm not going to go super in depth of like every single string box that came between here and there, so I'm going to kind of jump towards closer to the modern guitar. But one thing to point out that's just interesting is there's a 3,500-year-old Egyptian musician, Har Mose, that had a 3-string instrument they say is the oldest relic to a guitar. And if I can, I'll put a little picture from the web on there. And then the lutes and everything, they kind of call those Baroque guitars if you're talking about them leading up to what we call a guitar, because back then guitar wasn't a word yet. They were lutes and etc. And that's one thing they also could call the Baroque period, much like the Baroque period of German violins before Stradivari and all them sort of perfected them, when the sides were wrapped in to the heel and you can't reset the neck because they're Baroque violins, but they're always worth more money now, so watch out for those. So then we have the first classical guitar that's ever developed that was actually a guitar, by Italian luthier Gaetano Venezia in 1779. And then this other guy refined later the fan bracing, which they still use on classical guitars today, by Spanish maker Antonio de Torres Jurado in Seville. I think I'm saying that right. I'm probably not saying some of these names right, so I'm probably sorry about that. In Seville, Spain. So I'll put some pictures up. But so the fan bracing on your top, I don't have a fan brace guitar because I'd be able to build steel string guitars. But anyways, here's a top, for example. And I'll put some slideshows. But fan braces didn't have the X. There's very many variations, but they just had braces going out, like a fan, which gets it the name, and that was what they were using on these classical guitars. And that was the most popular guitar to be really known as a guitar, was the early Spanish guitar, the classical guitar, which still to this day is called the classical guitar because it is the classic, the original. They also say, interesting fact, this guy sort of invented the mandolin, but I'll have to do more history on that. I haven't researched the mandolin that much in depth, but I do know that back then the fan bracing was a big deal, and it made the guitars a lot louder. More people were playing them because they were able to get more volume and use a larger soundboard, because other than carved top instruments, they were figuring out ways. And don't judge this top, this is just an example top. It's actually warped, so I just use it for pictures and blah, blah, blah. But they needed ways to strengthen this flat surface, and I'm not even sure if they were using radiuses yet like we do nowadays. But so the fan bracing was a big deal, invention. And then, lo and behold, we get to who I would consider, in my opinion, the king of what we now know of acoustic guitars, Christopher Frederick Martin, who was a German immigrant. In 1843, actually invented the first X brace, and it was mostly used on smaller guitars. There's not a ton of information. I couldn't find like hundreds of things about that. It's kind of narrow, but I did find a certain musician that was like a concert player that was really talented back then, named Madame Delorges de Gave. I might have butchered that. But she considered Martin guitars still superior with the X bracing back then. And there was like 50 years where there was kind of the X brace. It wasn't a big deal, except to some musicians that had discovered them. It wasn't this crazy thing everyone was talking about yet. But the X brace was eventually, because they were still using gut strings back in 43 when they did that, because they didn't have steel strings yet. So then it was in the the early 1900s, when, you know, acoustic mountain music and stuff was becoming really popular over America, that they used the X brace to put steel strings on, which they were doing to kind of make more volume, so the guitar could be an instrument that could compete with fiddles, much louder, banjos, usually much louder, things like that. So then the X brace then became kind of a staple in the early 1900s. So in the first Dreadnought, model 222, it was basically made by Martin, and this part I'm a little not too sure of. It says Ditson Company. It was sold to them, so I guess Martin was like kind of part of their business somehow. I don't totally understand that part. In August of 1916 was the first Dreadnought ever made, and it got its name from a Ditson British battleship. So there was a Dreadnought class, so that's where you get the name Dreadnought. And at the time, Ditson, which was its own company, went out of business. So I guess not a lot of people were interested in the Ditson / Martin Dreadnought right then. Then they reintroduced in the 30s, I guess they were first called D1 and D2s, X-brace Dreadnoughts that soon quickly became to be the D18s and D28s we know to this day. So, and I know in the 30s they were using an X like this. This is a little OM, but forward shifted, they now call it. Back then it was standard X, but it was only about an inch to the sound hole. You can always check one by sticking your finger right there if you're in a guitar store and want to know, because if you go back here, you're the modern X. If you feel it like one knuckle, that's your forward shifted. And so I do also have this handy dandy template of a pre-war Martin Dreadnought, and they call it pre-war because it was World War II. And one other thing to touch on is these luthiers were total masters at the time. I mean, if you think about what they were using, the tools they had, they didn't have the stuff we had nowadays, and they were getting these X-brace guitars to sound really good, and they were slowly starting to boom in the market and sell a lot, and Martin became a household name. One thing to keep in mind that I personally learned from Brian Gallup at the Gallup Guitar Schools that I think is interesting is, you know, of course, the guitar sounded so good back then because they had better wood. I mean, they had Adirondack spruce trees back then. They were like, you couldn't fit your arms around them, you know, but they cut them all down to build planes and biplanes and planes for World War II and all sorts of stuff. We don't really have those kind of trees anymore because they all got farmed. So now we just have this farmed Adirondack that they're cutting as soon as it's big enough to be a guitar. Some planted just to be guitars. And anyways, also not just that, but, you know, these guys weren't just reading off a sheet saying, you know, let's make it this thick and let's put this brace here. The bracing was standardized, but when the guys were shaping it, they were a lot of German immigrants and stuff that were coming from luthier violin making families that knew how to read the wood and did tap tone and etc., etc. I won't bore you too much with that, but we can tap on this just for fun. Sounds pretty good over there, a little bassier over here. But so basically, you know, when the war ended and things changed, and also another thing I want to touch on, So it was 1939 exactly, I believe, that they were having too many warranty issues. So Martin took this X and they moved it back like an inch-ish. And they were doing that because the tops were lifting up. Because at the time, everyone was, playing bluegrass and stuff, and they were like, man, these banjos are loud. Can I put some gigantic strings on this and make it louder? And what was happening is the tops were pulling up or just ripping out and stuff. And so Martin, decided to strengthen it, and they made that area move a little less by doing that. But nowadays it's become the opposite, where everybody wants the old copy of the original, because the 30s Martin has remained king of sound, etc., especially in those type of genres. And there's other opinions out there and stuff, but this is just my little video. But that's about the history of how we got to here, where we have an X brace that can support the strength of steel strings to be louder. And pretty much every single acoustic guitar out there is somewhat of a Martin copy. And a lot of people, nowadays think Martin still makes some great stuff. Nowadays there's so many other companies out there that are basically doing what they did, and maybe you could say doing it better, and small luthiers as well. But anyways, that was the point of my video, was just to give you a little history lesson. So thank you guys. Please like and subscribe. I'm gonna start posting more stuff like this just because I think it's cool, and the world should be educated on more of what guitars are, where they came from, why they sound the way we do, and why we love them. Thanks. Have a great day.